Hello, Adrian. How are you?
Mandy, I'm well, and yourself?
Oh, that's fabulous. I'm very well, thank you. So just to introduce Adrian Foster is an entrepreneur who is semi-retired and travels the globe, investigating different business opportunities. And today we're lucky enough to have him in South Africa. And I was fortunate enough to garner some of his time to have a discussion about some of the topics that I deal with in my coaching. So thank you very much, Adrian.
Absolute pleasure.
Good.
Great to be here.
Good. So today we're going to just talk about maybe relationship coaching. I don't think you know a lot about what I do in that sphere.
Yeah, I don't, and I'll be very interested because I think relationships are everything and they're failing everywhere. Mandy, you said that you're now starting to actually interview couples rather than individuals.
Yes.
And I'm interested in that because I was a financial advisor for many years, and I always tried to get the husband and the wife together because it was a plan they were going to try and work on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it worked that way, and if you had just one or the other, it didn't work. But what was your reason? Why are you doing it that way?
You know, Adrian, what I realized is that when I was coaching only one individual in the couple, it almost gave them like an unfair advantage, because they would go home and their spouse was still stressed out and overwhelmed and unable to cope with various situations, or actually even the conflicts between the two of them. Right. Whereas my client would be, chilled and laid back and have the tools and the skills to just stay calm and deal with the situation. As a result, I started inviting people to be coached together so that they could learn those skills together.
Right, okay. And where do you think the biggest misunderstandings come between couples?
So very often when two people meet, we come from a childhood where we often come out of it feeling insecure and inadequate. And now we meet this person who for the first time in our lives makes us feel unbelievable, like we can take on anything. They make us feel gorgeous and brilliant and confident. And we suddenly feel like we can take on the world. All we want to do is just be with this person for the rest of our lives because we've never felt this amazing before.
Yeah.
And what we don't realize actually is that actually comes from within. The person has just introduced you to yourself. That is your authentic self.
Yeah.
The misunderstanding and all of that is actually that you believe it is their job to continue to make you feel that way,
right,
gorgeous and brilliant and confident.
Yeah.
Whereas what you don't understand is that it's actually your job.
Okay. So where does everyone go wrong? Where does it come from, this failure in the end?
Well, it's because when you get married, the expectation is that this person is going to be the one that's going to continue to make you feel good about yourself.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And then, life happens. As it does, routines, the daily hazards of living.
Yeah, the honeymoon is over.
The honeymoon is over. And essentially, now instead of being the person who is constantly buoying you up with you're so gorgeous and you're so amazing and you're incredible and you can do anything, now you're getting criticisms. You're getting, you didn't wash the dishes last night, or you left the lawn for me to mow this weekend, or you borrowed my car and you didn't fill it up with petrol. So suddenly all of those compliments and upliftments become criticisms and things dragging you down.
Sure.
And it feels like a betrayal, because this is not what you signed up for. You signed up for the person who was going to support you and make you look good and feel good for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And now is sucking the lifeblood out of you. So everything turns, and this is what builds that kind of resentment and that disillusionment and disappointment in your partner over time.
How do people within the relationship react to this betrayal, this change?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to realize that you're buying into the fairy tale. Okay, the Brothers Grimm, Hollywood, Disney have all fed us this fairy tale of marrying the person of your dreams and then riding off into the sunset and living happily ever after. The problem with that is that when you suddenly realize that this is no longer the truth, what a lot of people do is they're still buying into trying to get that same outcome, trying to get the happily ever after. So there's kind of three strategies that people try. Okay. At first, a lot of them will try the people pleasing. So I become everything to you, like I try and meet all of your needs and make sure that you feel happy and uplifted, because I'm hoping that by continuing to feed into your needs and that you'll reciprocate and you'll go back to the way it was in the beginning and start making me feel good about myself as well. Unfortunately, that very rarely works.
Happens, yeah.
So the next strategy then is you start doing the opposite. You start to kind of manipulate and hint and cajole the other person into doing what you want to make them appear to be the romantic savior that you're looking for. So things like, oh, did you notice that the neighbor bought his wife flowers for Valentine's Day? There's all these different sort of like hints that are dropped. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to go on a romantic weekend away? And trying to cajole the other person into taking on that role again of being the knight in shining armor or the princess that they married in the first place.
Okay.
And then unfortunately, if that doesn't work, then the last attempt is generally that they try and fulfill those needs themselves, so they'll end up kind of stonewalling and almost rejecting the other person and saying, I'll get my needs met somewhere else. So whether it's through kids or work or sport or their friends, they go elsewhere to get their needs met. And that's
when they drift apart.
It drives a wedge between them and their marriage. So things deteriorate from there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds like a mess. How do we start to sort this problem out? Because it's already existing. So you're coming in at a later stage. It should be done almost before it starts.
At best, what people are trying to do is just keep the peace. They learn what they need to say and what they need to do just to kind of pacify the other person. And they kind of can live side by side amicably for a very long time by doing that. At worst, they are constantly triggering each other, setting each other off, having screaming matches and cold shouldering each other or whatever it is, whatever strategies they go to. This doesn't make for a happy marriage. And in fact, what ends up happening is neither of them feel safe around the other person. And that's when it starts getting dangerous, because that's when people start looking outwards to other solutions, because they're not feeling safe in their relationship at home.
And of course they've had to divide their attention not only on one another, but now children and finances and jobs. So it's like
absolutely, it's complicated. It's complicated, yeah. Nobody ever said it was easy.
So it sounds like a nightmare. Everyone expects a fairy tale, but it's not happening. So where do we go?
Yeah, where do we go from here? So it's interesting you say that, because actually the first thing you've got to do is let go of the fairy tale and realize that relationships weren't originally meant to be this idea of riding into the sunset, into happiness, joy and happiness forever after. And that the real reason why you selected the person you did to spend your life, or the people you did, because often it's not your first relationship, is actually more for the way that they're going to irritate you and drive you crazy. Because in doing that, actually what they're doing is they're revealing to you the next step that you need to take on your journey into your own emancipation in this world.
With them or with someone else?
Well, preferably with them, because if you jump to someone else, then you're chasing after their eternally ever after, happiness ever after.
Yeah.
Whereas if you stay with that person and work through these things, what you'll find at the bottom is pure gold, because they will lead you to the next step in your personal growth to discover true emancipation.
But it almost sounds like there's a conflict. There's a conflict that you're building into it rather than solving it in a way.
Yes, it does sound like that. And the reason is because we make it a conflict.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that we're asking the wrong questions. The question that we're asking ourselves is, if you irritate me, the question I ask is, how do I need you to be different so that I can feel okay about myself? Okay, so if your spouse does something like refuses to speak with a certain tone of voice in a certain situation, and you think that is your job to change her tone of voice so that you can feel better about yourself, I've got news for you about how that's going to go. So actually what we need to do is ask a different question. And the question is rather, wow, when you speak to me in that tone of voice, it really makes me feel maybe angry or upset.
Or put down or whatever.
It makes me feel inferior. Yeah, it makes me feel inferior or small or like, you don't respect me. Whatever it is, whatever I think you're making me feel, that is exactly the next step that I need to take. And the question rather is, I wonder where that comes from.
Yeah.
And now, if both of you know these skills, you can both explore that. But you can kind of see that if that happened in a normal conversation, and I said, I wonder where that comes from, probably turn into another explosion where the other person comes out guns blazing, and then everybody erupts in another one of these conflicts.
Yeah.
So you have to know how to respond to that in order for it to actually be beneficial for both of you.
Sure, because you can't really discuss anything like that if you're in an emotional state. You've got to be
Absolutely.
at a peaceful state. So, and there'll probably be a lot of paradigms going into their early years that are stuck in there, that maybe they were window dressing in the beginning in their relationship, and then the true colours come out after the honeymoon, which might be a year or 2 years, or when the kids come. So that's when it starts to need a lot of coaching and a lot of support.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's where my coaching comes into play, actually, because they would have, the first part of the coaching is all about regulating your nervous system and enabling you to eventually get to that place where you are able to pause in the middle of something that's triggering you and ask a different question. Whereas if you don't go through that process, that coaching process, then I don't know that it's even possible to pause in the middle of something that normally would have triggered you into either an anger outburst or storming out of the room or whatever your trigger tended to be.
Sounds essential. In other words, instead of having the angry outburst, and that's, you're trying to coach in a reaction where one can start meeting each other halfway and discussing it and coming to a joint adventure of finding out each other where they want to be.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because can you see that here, instead of using sort of defend, attack or shut down, which are the sort of normal responses when we're under threat, you're turning towards compassion and curiosity, which is a very different approach. And you have to have a much more stable nervous system in order to do that, to be able to pause and choose a different response. One of the things that I teach people is how to tell the difference between a real threat and a false threat. Because before you have coaching, you might perceive any attack from your spouse as a real threat because it feels like a real threat in your body. But once you learn how to deal with that and how to calm your nervous system, then you have the space to access the sort of like the knowledge or the feeling that, okay, it feels like a real threat, but actually it's a false threat. I'm safe right now. I can become curious and compassionate and actually ask questions in the situation. I don't have to attack, defend, shut down, leave the room, or throw a tantrum, whichever defense mechanism you preferred.
Okay. So basically you've got to start speaking the same language, understanding each other and doing it as a team.
Yes, absolutely. And can you see that if you do that, if the two of you are working together and asking questions and getting curious about where these triggers come from and where the compensation mechanisms come from, that you get to know each other at a much deeper level, because you start to discover things not only about the other person but actually about yourself as well, that ends up with both of you revealing each other to yourselves. It's a very beautiful thing. And the one thing that is amazing about that is that when you have that kind of relationship, it is almost bulletproof. I say almost because you can never guarantee, but almost bulletproof, because after years of doing that, how is some young, floozy or hot-looking man going to cruise into that relationship and drive a wedge between that partnership? Because it just goes way beyond anything that anybody could achieve superficially in one night or a weekend or a week. Exactly. So in that way, I think that a lot of people are realizing this actually, and I'm starting to hear that young people are starting to select their partners based on their ability to meet them at this level, which I think is pretty amazing, because that's a vast difference from choosing the knight in shining armor or the princess who's going to rescue you from yourself.
Sure. So the question is, how does the average person out there even discover that there is this level, because most of them are unaware totally.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, the thing is our nervous system is miraculously designed, okay? Because if you think about it, your nervous system will get you to look for help eventually. That's how you discover this. And the way that it does it is, you've got to remember that first of all, you're born as pure and perfect as you're ever going to be. And then you go through sort of like 20 odd years of childhood and teenage years when your brain is not well developed. And that's where all of the sort of traumas and things like that happen that leave you feeling inadequate and insecure. Yeah. And then when you're an adult, now your brain is developed enough to actually solve the problems. Because as a child, you couldn't solve the problems. You know, you've got a father that drinks and beats your mom or something like that. A child can't process it. They just push it subconsciously.
Yeah.
But as an adult now, your brain is developed enough that you can actually process that stuff.
Yeah.
And here's the beauty of it, is that in your adulthood, things that remind you of the traumas that happened in your childhood will still trigger you in your adulthood, which is why your partner is the most likely person to be triggering you. And then that trigger is what leads you towards discovering what it was that caused the hypervigilance in your body in the first place.
Yeah.
And now as an adult, you go back to that memory and use your adult brain to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And in that way, you actually heal your nervous system from having to be triggered by that same trigger over and over again through your adulthood. Right. If you don't deal with it, it'll continue to trigger you until you're 85 years old.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, Mandy, thank you very much. That's been a very intense discussion. For me to try and summarize that, I'd say firstly that the fairy tale beliefs and the Netflix movies, they're probably the problem. We should get rid of those first.
Yes.
Because they give this false belief that it could all happen.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, people are getting married at a young age, because I've also read that only when you get to about 23 do you start, actually your frontal lobe starts developing to take responsibility for your actions and your discussion and where you are. So it depends on the level of maturity of both people. But I think with the coaching, where one can begin to speak the same kind of language and can start working things together to a common goal, I think that is going to be the solution. It's just a matter of getting to the people before it breaks down and is sort of irreversible. Absolutely. In them. But I think it sounds wonderful, and I think it's complicated for sure. But I think you're doing a great job, and I think it's very necessary, because with what's the divorce rate now, 70% or so
it's
of all
horrendous.
marriages.
It is absolutely
And of course
horrendous.
the children suffer and all that, and
Yeah.
there's just huge fallout there, and it's probably because they got married for the wrong reason in the beginning. You know,
Yeah.
they never really. It was either in lust or in love, and it was probably in lust.
Yeah.
And then when that wore off and a kid came along, suddenly there was no more romance. So it's a minefield.
Yeah,
And
it
therefore
is.
we need leaders like you to take us through the minefield and make sure it doesn't happen.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what I've basically done is taken a lot of concepts and ideas from a lot of the major thought leaders worldwide of today, and just condensed them into something that's simple, step by step, that the average person can understand. Because you know, often we'll listen to a video by this person, or we'll read a blog by that person, and they're all great ideas and it's all head knowledge.
Yeah.
But actually learning how to embody that stuff so that you can really stay calm when somebody pushes your buttons
Yeah.
is a completely different level. There's not a lot of people that can do
Can
that.
do it, yeah.
And that's the process that you need to go on in order to actually stay calm. And the example that I give to people is, what I teach you is not only to be calm and centered and at peace with yourself when everything's going well. It's to be calm and centered and at peace with yourself as if you're standing in the eye of a storm when the storm continues to rage around you.
Okay. Oh, that's